Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi, and today we're joined by 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor for a bit more on the historic confirmation of Supreme Court Justice, soon to be Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson to the High Court, the first Black female ever appointed to the court. So, a historic nomination indeed. She was confirmed just about an hour and a half ago by a 53-47 vote, which mostly went along party lines. But I know that the Biden administration had targeted getting a bipartisan component to that, and they did succeed in that by getting 3 Republican senators, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, as well as Susan Collins, on board with the nomination. But Whitney, first of all, thank you so much and for joining us here today, for giving us a bit more insight about this. Maybe the big overarching theme before we kind of dive into both the politics as well as the legal components of this is that this is a historic nomination. So what does this mean for Brown Jackson to be nominated, to be successfully nominated as the first Black woman to the Supreme Court?
Well, it certainly is historic, and it's it's sad that it's being somewhat overshadowed. That some people are saying, well, it was just because she was a Black woman, and no, that wasn't the case at all. And President Biden said that. He said, "I am going to nominate a Black woman, but the first thing is she's going to be eminently qualified," and that's really the issue. Is she qualified? So for the folks who are saying, well, this was just based on race, no, that wasn't the case at all. And we can look back to when Donald Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett, and he said, "I'm going to nominate a woman." And even the very first woman on the bench, Sandra Day O'Connor, which in 1981, when President Reagan said, "It's time for a woman," and everybody applauded them and said, yes, they're forward thinking and things like that. But when President Biden then said, "I'm going to nominate a Black woman," everyone called into question, well, this is favoritism. This is, Ted Cruz made some comments. But the reality is, the court has been in existence for over 230 years. There's, been 115 Supreme Court justices. 108 of them have been white men. There's been no Black women. There's been 2 Black men now and 5 women in total. So it hasn't been overly diverse. So the fact that we now have someone, the diversity is good. She's also a public defender, which we know was a criticism, but that's also a diverse factor. So this is certainly a historic moment in our country for sure. And I think it should be celebrated. But to the point of the qualifications and why she was nominated, she is, impeccably qualified. Everyone saw that. You can see her resume. And she's one of the few justices who, or soon to be justice, who sat as a trial court and then on the appellate court and now on the Supreme Court. And a lot of the Supreme Court justices don't have that experience. So I think it actually is really an enhancement of the court to have somebody with a variety of experience.
Well, you mentioned some of the criticisms that were lobbied against Brown Jackson, and 2 specific ones kind of seem to come around repeatedly from, frankly, the Republicans. 2 big takeaways, and you mentioned one of them, which was her being a public defender. That's one big part of it. And then the other big part of it was that there was a perception, at least amongst the Republicans, or at least a narrative they were trying to create, that she was soft on crime, and specifically in some instances involving child pornography, that she may have gone below sentencing guideline or below the maximum sentencing guidelines. Could you walk us through those criticisms and whether or not you find them valid, and if so, why?
Sure. So there were the 2 criticisms primarily. One, the public defender. I was really surprised at that. I mean, we have a 6th Amendment right to counsel. The fact that they were criticizing her for, defending criminals, and of course they can pick which criminals, but it is fundamental to our legal process, the notion of the presumption of innocence and the right to counsel. So I think that should be celebrated. I was a little surprised that they went in on that. And then the second thing, of course, was a record as it related to child pornography. And part of the issue there, and I will say that the criticism was that her sentences were lighter than other judges. And I've looked at some of the numbers, and her she's within the range of federal judges in terms of their sentencing. She was lighter in some regards in some of her cases from the recommendations, but she was always within the limits. She didn't, and one of the issues that we saw in the confirmation was the notion that Congress needs to actually be more consistent and actually address what the sentencing guidelines should be. And part of the issue is that you have judges that have a wide discretion, and it is all over the board to some degree. But certainly the narrative of them trying to paint her as, she wants to let rapists go free, that kind of thing is completely absurd. Those were the two primary, I think, criticisms. The third was her lack of explaining a judicial philosophy. I thought that was a pretty weak argument because she talked about originalism and textualism and deference to the Constitution, but she said, look, my process is, here's how I go about the cases. I take the law and I apply it to the facts that are before me. And actually, the confirmation hearings, the judges generally don't give a lot of information because they can't necessarily say how they're going to rule on a case before they see the case. And I noticed that I felt like she gave more information than most of the judges in the recent past. Definitely Justice Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, they really, they just deflected, which most of the judges do. So I thought she actually gave more information. So, but again, we have to see, this is part of the process with the confirmation. And I guess I would look at Kennedy, who ended up, being much more, in the middle than people anticipated. You don't know how these justices are going to rule until they get, really get on the bench. So I thought the criticisms, didn't land. Obviously, she was confirmed. And I think some of the more stronger and more bombastic arguments was obviously part of the political process because everybody had the national spotlight during the questioning.
Well, I suppose, I guess that's the positive. And I know this is going to be straying a little bit into the political realm, and you are a legal expert, so I don't want to, burden too much on you by asking this question. But there were a few perhaps concerning takeaways from the confirmation hearings. And specifically, I think one that kind of reverberated quite a bit was Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, who kind of openly said that, insinuate, I should say here, that the days of a Supreme Court justice being nominated by a party different than the president's may be over. So, for example, if the Republicans retake the Senate, but Biden is president, and Biden a Democrat, the Republican Senate, that there wouldn't even be a hearing in future years for that nominee of a Democrat. What was your takeaway from that? Were there any other big takeaways from the confirmation hearings, perhaps entering a new era of partisanship?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great point, and I appreciate you making mention of the political and legal, and there is so much overlap. This is a political and legal process. It's really a legal process that involves politicians, so it is a fine line. But I can definitely address it, and I could say that I think the partisan nature of the confirmation hearings is really a disservice. We have three branches of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judicial. The majority of the population, based on polls, has less than 50% confidence in the executive and the legislature. But the judiciary, there's still over 50% of the population that does have confidence, that does look at them objectively. And I think when we get more and more partisan in the confirmation hearings, that it gives a perception that the judges are going to rule in a partisan way. And in another way, maybe it does put a little pressure on them. Federal judges are appointed they have a lifetime appointment. But I remember with Justice Kavanaugh during his confirmation, and he literally yelled out the Democrats and the Clintons. And so I wondered if he ever here's a case involving the Clintons or involving Democrats as an entity. Would he have to recuse himself? Would there, that was just one statement in the heat of the moment, but it's concerning, and it hasn't always been like this. You can look back at Judge Antonin Scalia, who was very conservative. He was nominated unanimously. Judge Ginsburg, she had worked at the ACLU. Everyone knew she was quite liberal. Hers was, I think, 97-3 confirmation. So I agree with Lindsey Graham that if we get to the point that it's just partisan, it's going to be a disservice to the country, because the party who's not who doesn't get the nomination is going to say, oh, that's just a commie Democrat, and the Republican is just going to be a racist Republican, right? Everybody's just going to go to the kind of far ends of the extreme. And really, I mean, all of these justices on the bench are qualified from a intellectual and an experienced. I mean, these are very highly intellectual people. So it's unfortunate that it's become a disservice. I was glad to see that there were some Republicans in this way, but I think we really have to go back and look at what that process is about, because really they're just to determine if they're essentially fit for office. And there have been nominations in recent, Robert Bork and some others where they weren't confirmed, but that generally wasn't related to their intellect. It was more some sort of, I don't want to say a character flaw, but something along those lines that gave people concern.
With that in mind, did we get any hints about how Brown Jackson will legislate from the bench? For example, will she be a reliable liberal bloc vote with Kagan and Sotomayor, the other two more liberal justices on the court, or will she be more in the center, maybe with Justice Roberts in the middle?
Right. It's a good question, but I'll correct you in one way, because you said legislate from the bench, and that is actually, we hear that criticism.
Right. Yes.
So I figured it was right. That's why you said it. Right, because that's a criticism of an activist bench, is that they're trying to legislate from the bench, and a lot of people will push for a more passive bench, which is supposed to just really look at constitutional issues. So it's interesting where she'll land. I mean, one thing that one sort of takeaway is it may not matter exactly where she is, because we have this 6-3. And that's why some people said, well, it wasn't as contentious of a hearing as it could have been, because they felt that another liberal or a Democrat nominee is not going to have much influence on a 6-3 court. So I think she's going to probably side with Sotomayor and Kagan, but you don't know. I looked at some of her cases related to race discrimination when she was on the bench, for example, and she had, as it related to employment discrimination, I think there were 22 cases. I think the majority of those happened to be Black men, and she had ruled against, I think, 19 of those cases. And so that doesn't, I just pull that fact out because there'll be people who say, oh, she's already going to be biased. She's already in this way. And I think that fact alone, when I was heavy in the practice, I practiced primarily employment discrimination, dealing with these kind of claims. And so I know that area, and the fact that she had dismissed a lot of those, to me, is telling in one way. So we'll have to see. There is going to be, I think she'll have a race case as it relates to at college admissions. I know there will be the Mississippi case dealing with reproductive rights and abortion. However, that one will likely, that's going to be Justice Breyer who's going to rule on that, because they had oral arguments in December. That ruling will probably come out in June. So Justice Breyer will be finish out the term, which will go through the summer, and then Justice Jackson will start in October in the next term.
Thanks for that in-depth answer. And I guess any final takeaways about Brown Jackson's successful appointment to the Supreme Court?
No, I just think it is historic. I'm glad to see that it's being celebrated, and I'm glad that it was bipartisan. And hopefully we look at the process and figure out a way that we really want to have trust in our judiciary. We're looking at the election of last year that was so, people are still saying it's the election was stolen, but it's the judges that look at the evidence and the judges that remain objective. And if we lose confidence in the judiciary, then we're going to have so much conflict in society, because there's no one that we trust to arbitrate and to rule on these issues based on the evidence and based objectively. So that's one takeaway, but it's exciting. It was good. People paid attention. It's good for folks to understand some of these processes, because we have representatives that are going to stand in for us, and we want to know what they're doing and how the process works. So it's the last 8 years, I think, have been very educational from our legal and political perspective.
Well, 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor, we really appreciate a few minutes of your time and lending us some of your expertise and insight about the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first female Black justice in the history of the Supreme Court. But Whitney, we really appreciate a few minutes of your time here today.
It's always good to be here, and call on me anytime.
Will do. Absolutely. Thanks so much again, Whitney Traylor.
All right. Thanks, Chris.